How are you over exceeding the quota and smashing the number out of the park?
My timing was very good and the territory was very good. I mean, I talk about kind of 3 T's: territory, timing and talent.
Word of wisdom to your younger self.
3 things. Number 1, find very early in your career a truly great leader. Number 2, put yourself in a challenging but hyper growth environment. And then I think the third piece of advice would be get into...
Welcome to Season 2 of Funnel Vision, where we bring the most renowned sales leaders on board to discuss the strategies that are driving forward-thinking go-to-market teams and the role AI is playing. I'm greeted here today with Dale Payne, who's leading the commercial business at Kong, ex-Adobe, as part of Adobe Sign, and also an investor and advisor at Curvo. Dale, it's great to have you on today.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to it.
Awesome. And I'd just like to start the conversation with some of your formative years. You've had a very successful trajectory in sales, from starting as an individual contributor to moving to sales leadership and then running an entire region. And you studied at Brighton University sport and leisure management, and then progressed into sales. So curious to understand a bit more around your formative years and ultimately what led you into becoming a salesperson.
Yeah, God. Where do I start? So, I did sport and leisure management at university, as you mentioned. It was very much a business-focused degree. So sports law, sports marketing, so on and so forth. But I think from probably a fairly early age, I was quite coin-operated, I think is the term. So leaving university, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to maximize earning potential. Rightly or wrongly, and that led me down the path of sales. I think it's fairly common that, people refer to falling into the profession. I could probably put myself in that category, but I would say the moment that I entered into the industry, I probably knew I'd landed in the right place.
And as we know, sales isn't for everyone. And as much as it is a sport that you learn and you become good at over time, there are some innate fundamental characteristics and personality traits that make successful salespeople. So what do you think it was about your personality and character traits that set you up with a good foundation to move into sales?
Yeah, good question. I think will to win and grit fundamentally is very important. Ever since I could walk, I played sport, right? I was, 3-4 years old and had a cricket bat in hand, a golf club in hand, playing football, boxing, you could name it. I played the sport. And I played a lot of cricket and a lot of team sports growing up. And I think you naturally learn how to, win gracefully, lose gracefully, but ultimately what it takes to win. And I don't think that ever left me. I love to win. Still do to this day. I'm probably the most competitive man on the planet. And I think that directly translates into sales, quite frankly. But it is an up and down profession, right? The highs are very high, but the lows can be very low. I think through my career, my general sort of temperament, emotion, patience has evolved, perhaps. And I think after kind of 14 years of selling, you do become a little bit more numb to some of the more negative parts of the job that we do. And you learn to kind of ride those waves effectively. But I think having high resilience, a high amount of grit, a real will to win, a will to prepare is very, very important. But I think the number one driver for me is my kind of personal why. I've always had a number in mind of what I wanted to achieve to get to where I wanted to personally. And that's, for me, the driver behind why I get out of bed every morning, or get up every morning. What keeps bringing me back into the office to sell the software that we sell.
Yeah, and financial motivation is obviously the key leading indicator for salespeople that gets them to go through the grit and become determined and deliver outsized quotas. And I think what's really interesting is you mentioned sports teams, and professional commercial teams are often described as sports teams in a way. It's an analogy that's often used within sales teams themselves. What do you think it is around sports and that camaraderie and team spirit that leads people to deliver outcomes and want to win, that there's then transferable into a sales team and, a larger organization?
Yeah, good question. I've built many sales teams over the last 5-10 years, and some of the most successful people that I've worked with have had a very strong sporting background. So I've had, ladies that have worked for me that have been world champion kickboxers. I've had, tennis players that have worked for me that have been, on the verge of turning professional, playing against Rafael Nadal. I've had, guys that run Ironmans in less than 9 hours. It's kind of quite incredible some of the history that these people have had. And again, I couldn't tell you exactly what it is, but I do think there is a lot to be said for that, team mentality, that ability to learn how to win, how to lose, how to come back from adversity. Not everything goes your way in sport, right? There's not a sports person on the planet that has won every game, every match, every event that they've ever been a part of, right? Losing is fundamental to sport, and losing, unfortunately, is fundamental to business as well. So I think there's probably some level of transferability, if that's a word, between sport and business. And again, even if you look at, I suppose, conferences and SKOs, a lot of the guest speakers that people bring in, again, have come from a sporting background, and they typically do draw parallels between, sport and how that can be translated into the world of business.
Yeah, I fundamentally agree. I think sport's a great foundation to have in place. And from my experience, at least, there's been lots of unconventional pathways that have led people into sales, like actors, musicians, and people that didn't necessarily know they were going to become salespeople, but ended up falling into the path because of, again, the motivation on the financial outcome and where they want to get to, but then also having that camaraderie, team spirits, and being willing to want to win, but still being okay with losing here and there and knowing that that's part and parcel of the process. Now, I know that when I first started in sales, I wasn't very good. I lost the vast majority of deals, and it took a very long time to become proficient in generating pipeline and closing revenue. I had to learn the hard way. You might tell me that your journey was very different, but your first sales job, just walk us through, day one, week one, month one, and how you were able to get into the deep end and start to improve your sales skills.
Yeah, sure. God, I had so many learnings in those first couple of years. I was, pretty bad, probably, when I first started. Definitely didn't kind of, pick up the phone and realize, God, I'm really good at this from day one. I think there was a few key learnings from it. I think, number one, I did work very hard, right? I think that hard work, determination has been something that's been with me from day dot. Like I said, I'm a very, very competitive individual. Back then, we had a TV in the office which showed how many call connects you'd made per day. I don't think there was a single day in the 2 years that I worked at that company where I didn't leave the office at number one, right? Like, I would not leave the office until I was number one. The reality was that, quantity didn't necessarily mean quality. Quantity doesn't mean quality. Sorry, make sure I get that right. I was doing really high volume, but actually probably not going after who I should have gone after. Now, I kind of got away with it because the volume was so high that even though the percentage of conversion was fairly low, I was still able to do good numbers. But, knowing what I know now, I could probably dial back that quantity by 80% and achieve, 200% of the results. So I think there's a lot to be said. Don't confuse, quantity with quality, perhaps. So I suppose that was one of my key learnings. I also quite quickly realized I probably didn't want to be in the world of managed services and recruitment. So I sold managed services for the first few years, which was great. It was actually highly technical, which has set me up quite well for my time at Adobe and my time at Kong. But there's some interesting stories around, working for years to open an account and then people within managed services teams very quickly ruining relationships. I quickly learned that if you sell a bit of software, hopefully the software does what you say it's going to do, which can't be the same can't be said for people.
Yeah, delivery teams inherently are a lot more unpredictable, and it's definitely frustrating when you pass something over the fence that you spent months on closing, and then it doesn't quite end up in the way that you perceived up front.
Yeah.
I think one useful insight there is around the fact that when you start, it's all about volume. Your manager's saying volume, 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 and it's all around building that muscle to be the top of the leaderboard and have done the most activity. And I think that ingrains a good work ethic. But to your point, it's often around strategic and intentional selling, where you can have far fewer conversations that are more productive with high propensity to buy, that are better aligned and still deliver a better outcome. And ultimately that becomes the more prudent and productive way of selling, where you're not burning yourself into the ground, but you're more consistent and stable.
Yeah.
Is that a type of teaching that you bring to your team in Kong around targeting and looking at intentional selling rather than just pure a volume play?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we do an awful lot of work around defining our ICP, tiering our accounts, and being pretty ruthless with our qualification, especially within the commercial business that I run. Because it's a velocity business. We are doing 10, 15, 20 net new logos per quarter. So you've got to be really clear on what's a fit, but even sometimes more importantly, what's not a fit. So I think defining the ICP and working out where you're going to spend your time is incredibly important. And I think we're very lucky today that actually there's a lot of technology that helps us do this as well. So for me, it's a mix of science and art, and using that technology to get a helping hand.
Yeah, I'm rewinding back to the start of your career. I'm imagining you didn't have all the tech in place to help like we do today with prospecting softwares, auto dialers. Conversation intelligence is much more of a rudimentary approach at the start. So what was it like back then? What was a day in the life of a full cycle seller?
Yeah, so we definitely didn't have any of that, that's for sure. I'm pretty sure back then we didn't even have headsets. So I suppose a funny sidebar, I actually, because of the amount of calls I did that I mentioned earlier, I got a repetitive strain injury in my shoulder and had to have physio for about 6 months because I was just literally, my hand just stayed in this position for 10, 11, 12 hours a day. So yeah, very, very, very phone focused, and far little reliance on social, LinkedIn, email, so on and so forth. We had a basic CRM. I can't remember the name of it now, but an archaic bit of software that I've never seen since. Ironically, it was actually quite good for prospecting. So it allowed you to schedule follow-ups. It allowed you to write notes on your meeting. It was probably more of a prospecting tool than it was a CRM, quite frankly. We didn't even use it to forecast. And I remember when I moved to a subdivision or an acquisition of Oracle, and we were using Oracle technology. Some of the subsidiaries were using the earlier versions of Salesforce. And I do remember thinking it actually wasn't as good as what we had at Capita. And then, this is when the emergence of, your sales lofts and outreaches and gongs and now Curvo have arrived, that do a lot of this hard work and automation for us.
Yeah, and I guess it certainly was a great foundation not to have that in place, because calling still today is the most prevalent channel to get through to decision makers. And inherently, a lot of other channels have got quite noisy. Email, LinkedIn, for example, where calling is still the muscle to develop for sellers early on in their tenure. Sure. I wanted to dig in a bit to your journey to joining Adobe and the great trajectory you had. Looked into your profile, that you're kind of a top 3 performer in EMEA and have had consecutive promotions. Just walk us through the journey of how you ended up in Adobe and the kind of process and pathway there.
Yeah, sure. I suppose, like many salespeople and individual contributors, I followed a leader. So the vice president that I worked for at Oracle, a chap called Richard Langham, who remains a mentor to me today. He went from Oracle to Adobe and wanted me to join him. I think I said no for 4 or 5 months, and then eventually he convinced me that joining Adobe was was the right thing to do. And I mean, look, he was right. It was, one of the best moves I've made for sure. Had an incredible time at Adobe, and will always look back with fond memories.
And what led you to over exceeding your quota? Because did you start as a account executive when you first moved there, and then moved up to sales management? How were you over exceeding the quota and smashing the number out of the park?
Yeah. Again, I'd like to tell you it was because I was, this phenomenal AE. I think the reality is my timing was very good. And the territory was very good. I mean, I talk about kind of the 3 T's: territory, timing, and talent. I think the territory was good, and the timing was fantastic. So this was in 2014, 2015 that I moved. And I actually joined EchoSign, which was a subsidiary or had just been acquired actually by Adobe. So back then, everyone was transitioning into these, digital agreements. Printers, faxes were quickly becoming a thing of the past, and doing business at pace with velocity was very, very important. The emergence of home working, so on and so forth. The timing was very good, right? The companies that we were dealing with were ready for that disruption, that transformation. And EchoSign and DocuSign and the other e-signature players in the market did very, very well, right? I mean, I think if you look at the fastest growing companies to, I think, $1 billion in ARR, DocuSign still, even today, is like 7th or 8th. So yeah, timing was very, very good. Territory was very, very good. And yeah, hopefully my execution was half decent as well, because I managed to get some pretty good results.
And that's a really useful way to kind of look at those 3 T's of the key pillars to being successful in sales. Which one do you think is the most prevalent? Is it timing, talent, or territory?
Oh, good question. So I always say you only need 2 to do well. If you get all 3, this is when you can make life-changing amounts of money. I think if I was to only choose one, I think it would be timing. I think if you have good timing, you join a company with a phenomenal product in an industry that is ripe for disruption, even if you don't have a huge amount of talent, even if you don't have, the tier 1 territory, you can still do pretty well.
So it sounds as if product market fit is the key thing for sales leaders to index on when looking for companies to work at, even before then looking under the hood at the sales function and the maturity and the talent piece. So you talk about the idea of the 3 T's, and I guess timing being the most prevalent one. So as you were doing your diligence to join Kong, given you kind of joined there relatively recently, how did you go about analysing the market and knowing that Kong had the right product market fit for you to embark on a journey with them?
Yeah, sure. So I'm quite an analytical individual. So I'd created a scoring mechanism with criteria that was important to me. There was kind of 7 or 8 different categories. I then looked at the fastest growing companies on the planet from a technology standpoint and started scoring them against the categories that I'd built. So I quickly whittled down sort of 70, 80 companies down to about 8 or 9 and started conversations with all of these companies. And Kong was one of those companies. For me, Kong really stood out, right? I think you can't go into a conversation now whether that's personal or professional without talking about AI. And our CEO, an Italian chap, has got a great saying, which is there is no AI without APIs. Now, Kong is the API company, right? There's a great quote from Jensen Huang, who's the CEO of NVIDIA, which I've got on my phone here. And he said that we're heading towards a future where all code will essentially be API calls to large language models, with those LLMs calling other LLMs, right? So LLMs pinging other LLMs, but that's going to need to be governed. It's going to need to be secure. Tokens are becoming very, very expensive. You're going to want something in between that provides you that level of comfort as a business. And Kong is that provider, right? So, Kong's released an AI gateway. That product is selling, I think, 19 times faster than any other product that we've released in our history. So, I think Kong are just so perfectly positioned to facilitate the AI transformation that all of our customers and our prospects are now working on. You combine that with a world-class leadership team, hopefully that is a recipe for success.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good way to evaluate it. And it's definitely the right time, given that we're in an agentic future now where agents will be interacting with other agents, but more specifically interacting with your own data. And your own data inherently, there's risk there to ingest that all into an LLM. And that's where unified API companies come into the fold, where they can essentially ring fence the risk around letting people loose on your data, and be able to manage those authentications so that LLMs can be able to talk to each other, and we can move towards that agentic future where we can create the reality. And I guess selling into the large enterprise accounts, what are you seeing at the moment in terms of the narrative shift towards agentic AI?
Yeah, I mean, there is a real shift for sure. I think there's a mix of excitement and fear. So for the reasons that you've mentioned there around securing your own data, ensuring that maybe anything that's proprietary doesn't leave the firewall is pretty important. But I think people are really excited about the automation that it's going to bring, the savings, the efficiency, the speed. This is going to be very, very transformational. And we're seeing it amongst every customer we are speaking to, that is for sure. We cannot go into a customer conversation without talking about an MCP server or some level of AI gateway where they are building something agentic themselves, or procuring something from a third party. Yeah,
that's great to hear. MCP servers have become all the rage now, as that proliferates across people building for agentic solutions. And how do you think sales is going to shift over the next year or so? There's been a lot of talk that all salespeople are going to be replaced through AI agents, where your virtual agent will go and sell to you. And the other school of thought is that AI is going to empower sellers to be more productive and focusing them on indexing on trust and relationships and excelling in the sales conversation. How do you hypothesize a change and shift in sales given that these new technologies have now been brought into fruition?
Yeah, again, good question. So I'm not sure if you've seen the article that's circulating quite a bit at the moment. It's the article that kind of calls out that ChatGPT is making people more stupid, I think is the headline, which is quite attention grabbing. So I think a lot of people have fallen for this article, and they've read the headline, they've read the synopsis, they've maybe even pumped it into ChatGPT to get a synopsis, and what you get back isn't actually that fruitful. I think when you read the article, it breaks down a study which was done, which looks at kind of brain activity effectively. So one group are solely reliant on an LLM, ChatGPT in this case. Others were solely reliant on Google. And then the third group were literally only kind of using their brain, right? And what it showed was, a mix of results, right? But the most interesting finding was when they did version 2 of the study, they had the group that only used their brain, then use ChatGPT on top. That group far outperformed the other categories, right? Now, I get we're early, but I suppose the point being, I foresee AI helping salespeople, but you cannot be solely reliant on it. So I think if you're already talented, intelligent, curious, hardworking, and you then leverage a tool set, AI, to become even better, that's where you're going to find your real A player. I think if you're solely reliant on AI and you forget the basic fundamentals, that probably isn't going to help. I think there will be a level of automation. I think AI will bring a level of risk to some level of sales. I personally cannot foresee a route where it completely replaces.
Yeah, I mean, we have the same school of thought here at Curvo, where we see the reality of augmenting sellers with the right type of enablement, essentially. And I think you can't replace those innate sales characteristics that make A players, the ones that have that natural born charisma, or are curious and ask the right questions, or can mirror really well and are able to, adapt like chameleons on the fly in certain sales meetings. I think there's a fundamental level of foundation that still needs to be there, and AI then becomes the accelerating factor that takes the middle third of reps into becoming top performers, or takes your top performers and adds 5 to 10 points of gain on what they're already doing, so that they can then ultimately deliver more. But firmly of the same view that there needs to be the sales foundations there. And I guess that's what's different with the previous generation of sellers that were coming through that didn't have all of the tools at hand, so were able to build up the right muscles. And the ones now, they're almost sport for choice, where they could just prompt GPT and expect it to come up with all the answers for them.
Yeah.
Now, rewinding to your transition in Adobe from an individual contributor to becoming a manager, as we know, not all AEs become great managers. They're two different characteristics. So what do you think it was about you that enabled you to become a successful manager and to follow suit with that trajectory after being an individual contributor previously?
Yeah, it was tough, actually. I think the reality is when you look at someone's LinkedIn profile or CV, you'll see people that have moved through the ranks and they've gone from, SDR to inside sales to commercial, mid-market, enterprise, into management, so on and so forth. And it does look like this kind of seamless, very nice walk uphill. The reality is it's sort of seldom plays out that way, right? I think even though I was a very successful AE, number 1, 2, or 3 in EMEA for many, many years in a row, it didn't automatically mean that I was going to become a good manager or even qualify me for that position. That transition was actually quite tough, in all honesty. I think it took me probably 18 months to a couple of years to achieve what I wanted to achieve. So yeah, it was tough. It was definitely tough. But one, I'm very glad that I persevered with and stuck at it. I think what helped me at Adobe was I'd had 5 years of selling that technology. So I knew the product inside out, right? My network was very, very strong. I knew who I needed within what deal at what point. So when I transitioned into management, okay, I needed to understand how to be a good, or how to become a good manager, but I didn't need to learn the product, the ecosystem, the network, the process, the sales methodology. That kind of stuff I had somewhat down, which allowed me then to learn on the job, as it were, when I became a manager. I think should I have become a manager for the first time externally, I think I would have really struggled.
And what was the main thing you struggled with in that transition?
I think one of the things that I struggled with was how deep I was trying to go in some of the deals. So as an AE, I'd have been running 4, 5, 6 deals per quarter. And for the most part, you knew inside out what was happening without having to refer to your notes. When I became a manager and I was managing, 5, 6, 7 people, I suddenly had 40, 45, 50 deals, maybe even more by the time we added renewals. It was impossible for me to understand the level of detail that I did as an AE as a manager. And that's what I tried to do for the first quarter or two. And I did a very, very bad job at it. So I very quickly realized that I needed to home in on the really important bigger deals, the deals where we had a lot of attrition risk, and then maybe more surface level was okay for the run rate business.
So I guess that's an element there of prioritization. So looking at where the most risk is and indexing on ensuring that those opportunities are set up for success. How were you able to prioritize which deals needed most attention and which ones you could leave more autonomously with reps?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. Naturally, you're drawn to the deals with the highest ASV, of course. So that was one element. I think you quite quickly get to grips with what AEs are very self-sufficient, the AEs that deliver quarter on quarter, they forecast accurately, they're well tenured, they understand the product. Hopefully you can leave those people to it to a degree. Of course, you give them all the help as and when they need it, but sometimes you have people that are so talented that they don't need too much support from you, which is a complete luxury as a sales manager. So you will then spend time with the people that really need it, prioritize the bigger deals, and making sure you're focusing in the areas that are gonna move the needle, right?
And historically, looking back, what's been the key reason you've seen deals fall off a cliff?
God, where do I start? How long have we got? I mean, look, the classic is, no champion, no deal, right? And that rings true for every sales process that I've been in. I think for me, most recently, if we look at EchoSign and Adobe as an example, we were very lucky that we sold a product that had, real demonstrable value, right? We sold into every industry. Actually, it wasn't just finance or just software or just logistics. We actually were multi-industry. We were also multi-department. So for us, we had a wider array of champions that we could build and test, but we could also build a very structured business case, right? Some of the business cases we created were, phenomenal. Some of them were for airlines that during COVID had to build a business case on making sure their cargo planes were absolute capacity, right? Others were building the hospital that was spun up at the Excel during COVID. Others were basic cost saving. There really was such a wide variety of business cases. But I think when we had a demonstrable business case with tangible metrics, and we understood the cost of doing nothing, and we had a champion, more often than not, you win. When we didn't have those two things, look, we would still sometimes win deals, honestly, but that's where we would lose. And that doesn't necessarily mean losing against a competitor. We probably lost more to do nothing than we did DocuSign or name your other, e-signature tool.
That's a really useful insight. And I guess from talking to hundreds of sales leaders every month, the inertia of doing nothing for buyers is often what prevails. The key reason you're losing deals is because of no decision. And that inherently is the most painful place to get to with a deal, where you want it to be a binary yes or a no. The in-between is where all of the risk is associated with. And the champion building is also a core thing. And a lot of people have very different definitions of what a champion actually is. And if we look at medic training per se, there's a big difference between a coach and a champion, and maybe just a friend, someone that likes talking with you, where you say single-threaded and have conversations just because it's fun. And often AEs will pursue that track without qualifying a champion early on. From your view and experience, what are the key ingredients in qualifying a best-in-class champion?
Yeah. I think the step before that even is a common language, right? Because you're right. If you speak to 10 different companies, you're probably going to get 10 different answers as to what a champion truly is, right? And that's kind of fine to a degree, right? But I think it's important that you agree a common language at a company level, at a manager level, and an IC level as well. Because then when you're in a forecast call, or when you're in a deal review, or when you're trying to help someone move the deal from stage 3 to stage 4, when you're talking about, is this person a coach, or are they a champion, or are they just simply a technical stakeholder, you all understand what defines that champion, right? We look at influence versus authority a lot. You want to stay away from the Ninas, the no influence, no authority. And we've got a very clearly defined, description of what that champion is, how we test that champion, and that's the common language that we typically use in our weekly forecasting sessions, one-to-ones, and when anybody needs some help with any form of deal.
I think it's a really useful thing to have in place so that everyone knows what the rules of the game are internally. Like, if we're going to look at a champion, here's our framework for success, here's how you evaluate it. And then it becomes a matter of, the common language prevailing in deal reviews, rather than having that subjectivity of, are they really a champion? Are we really sure that, they're in the right place to drive this forwards? And the other component that you talked about is business cases and urgency. And again, from talking with lots of sales leaders, urgency is one of the key problems. And within discovery calls, this is often the fact that the rep has found some surface level pain, but they haven't gone below the iceberg. They haven't implicated it to where they've got to that visceral level of pain. And they also haven't started to build metrics around the pain that ultimately build a business case that has enough of an urgency driver associated with it. What's your view on the strategy that reps should be using, even from the earliest of stages, to make urgency the key point that drives the velocity of the deal?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question. It's hard, is the reality. You can have a strong champion. You can even have a business case that has a payback in a year or two. Sometimes even that's not enough, right? Because, what we're talking about here, I suppose, is a compelling event, right? You're doing your very, very best to find a compelling event, a high cost of do nothing, which then drives that urgency. I think very easy for existing business, renewal, so on and so forth, because there is a contracted compelling event, right? For new business, for new logo acquisition, that can be much harder. I think this is something that we try to drill into with our customers and try to work backwards from what is important for them, right? I think one of the things that I talk to my team a lot about is our end of quarter is not a compelling event. Customers do not care, right? We see it time and time again. A salesperson will say, oh, you've got to sign by the end of May, or, in June, the cost goes up. I think I can count on one hand how many times that's actually been true in the last 14 years. So end of quarter is not compelling. I suppose what you're looking for is there a new project that the customer is, told their shareholders is going to go into go live, and they need to start on migration 3 months before, therefore you need to sign a contract the month before that. That's pretty compelling, right? They have committed to their shareholders, they will have something migrated by a date, and they've got a delivery plan working back from that point. Great. That is fairly compelling. There's a bunch of compelling reasons why, these things would happen. I mean, again, going back to the airline that we did a deal with at the start of COVID, they were running a cargo business, and at the time, they didn't charge their customers for cancelling. Now, during COVID, the only aeroplanes that were flying were cargo planes. Believe it or not, people were still cancelling. This was the only way that company was able to make money. It was the most profitable part of that given business. So for them, they had to very, very quickly work out how they were able to adjust their contracting process to make sure there were penalties for people that cancelled within a day, within a week. That was super compelling, because every plane that left that was at 90% capacity, they're losing out on 10% of that capacity. That was a huge revenue number, right? So their urgency was very, very, very high. Now, you're not going to have that in all deals. You're not going to have that migration that I previously spoke about. Sometimes they don't exist. And that is unfortunately why we do see slip deals.
And the perfect set of events, and to the example with the airline where they're losing 10% of capacity and they're basically on fire at that point. There's so much pain there and urgency that they have to buy it, and they will buy it. And not all deals are created equal, and there's often the case where it's hard to find those urgency drivers, particularly around, I see it a lot where reps have false urgency drivers. Such as the delivery team's never full capacity. You always scale it up depending on the demand that you're selling to, or someone's going away on holiday, or the end of quarter example. There's a series of falsified compelling events that aren't actually that compelling. One great one that I've seen time and time again is conferences. If you can tie in a compelling event to a conference that's happening, somehow your solution's influencing something they're announcing at the conference. If it's a new product line and you're selling the API to make that happen, then they have to physically deliver it by that date. Like if we think about Apple's conferences, they have to physically stand on the stage and show something.
Yeah.
That's often an amazing way to drive urgency, because there's a kind of cut-off date. But yeah, key compelling events are such a critical thing to have in place so that there is real urgency that's built. What's your view on a deal that isn't created equal, where there is no compelling event and the rep still is selling it based on the other factors that are there, such as the champion and the pain and the need?
Yeah, again, tough one. I think if there is a genuine champion, if there is a genuine pain, and if there is a genuine tangible, demonstrable business case, I think it's worth continuing that pursuit, right? With business cases, let's just say, as an example, you're looking to land a deal for 100K, and the business case verified by the customer returns $1 million. On the surface, you're in a really good place, right? However, when you start to dig into the customer's list of priorities, returning $1 million, regardless of how that $1 million is coming to fruition, might not be enough. They might have 5 other projects, all of which that deliver 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million of returns. So even though your project has demonstrable ROI, has champion, has pain, it still might not be enough, right? And if the customer says, look, we're going to do this, but for whatever reason, we've got to go and deliver these 4 or 5 other things before we get to this one, okay, fine. You would hope that you would continue to engage. You would hope that you could maybe go and sell a few other products to increase that return on investment, to bump it up the priority list, or you could get even higher up within the account to try to drive that level of urgency. If you don't have those 3 things and the deal slips and slips and slips, that's when I think you've got to really question if this is something we should continue with. Like I've said, going back to the ICP conversation from earlier, it's as important to disqualify as it is to qualify. And if that customer maybe isn't within your ICP and it is number 5 on the priority list, maybe your time is better spent elsewhere.
And that ties fantastically into competition. And competition not necessarily being your next most vendor that you sell against in deals, but actually competition is often internally what's happening. So what are the other initiatives that in fact are delivering more value? Where is the time allocated elsewhere? And those are often questions that more junior sellers aren't asking, is figuring out the internal competition and asking where this is on the pecking order of priorities internally, and figuring that out so you know where you stand up front. And I guess disqualification being a key thing that many reps struggle with because it's anti-human psychology. When someone's offering you money, perceived money, and you're saying no, it seems like you're doing the opposite of what you should be doing.
Yeah.
So how do you train the mentality of being open and willing to disqualify and getting reps into that mindset early on?
I think the reality is, I'm not sure what the opposite of a vicious cycle is. I can't think of the phrase right now, but that rings true when we're talking about qualifying out of opportunities. The best time to negotiate a deal is when you're already above target, right? So for the reps that are successful, that have strong VO, good pipeline, are above their target, they find it very, very easy to remove the opportunities that they don't think fall within your ICP and are hitting the main metrics around, pain, champion, so on and so forth. Where I see people not doing a good job on this is where they are behind target. And to your point, they want to keep their arms around absolutely everything, just if there's a 5-10% chance of it coming in. Again, the reality is they probably would be better to let them go, qualify them out, and go back to the drawing board in terms of your PG, going to try to book that meeting with that tier 1 account. It's something we talk about a lot. Do I get it right? Do the team get it right every day, every week, every quarter? Absolutely not. But again, if you're able to very clearly get your team to buy into the vision, get your team to buy into what constitutes an ICP, it can be quite easy to score those opportunities against the opportunity, the pain, the champion, but the ICP, and hopefully you can, relatively quickly come to an assessment on if this is a good fit or not.
Yeah, and I think ultimately leadership plays a big role there within the sales team. And now you're quite senior at Kong and leading EMEA. What do you think it's about you that other reps look up to help lead and guide them?
I think if I look at my fundamentals maybe of being a manager, right? What's important to me when I work closely with the team and the wider supporting network. I think empathy is a big one, in all honesty. Look, we're just selling software, right? We are not heart surgeons. We're not saving lives. We are selling software, right? And I think you've got to appreciate that people have stuff going on outside of work. And we're all humans. We've all got emotions. As we mentioned earlier, it's a job where there's highs and lows. And I think you've got to have empathy towards that and understand that, people operate and learn and react in different ways. So I think that's something that's important to have and always reflect on and have in the back of your mind. For me, transparency and sometimes fairly brutal honesty is quite important. I think you've got to be willing to have those tough conversations with your people. And as a sales manager, you're always having to have tough conversations. And for me, being quite open and transparent in those conversations is pretty important. And that hopefully leads to it being a two-way street, right? You can have an open conversation with your people because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. We do have tough days, tough weeks, tough quarters. I think that's very important. And I think the third thing I'll mention is building a team culture, right? You want to have some fun along the way. We spend more time with the people we work with than our family more often than not. So you want to have a bit of fun, along the way. I mean, when I was at EchoSign and Adobe, I remember we went to Switzerland for a meeting. It was me, one of the AEs, and a solution consultant. And the AE said, "Oh, if we're in Switzerland, do you want to go maybe skiing for the weekend? Because I've never been skiing. I'm going to go and get some lessons." I was like, "Yeah, you don't need to ask me twice to go skiing. I love skiing." And we ended up putting an invite out to the whole team effectively and said, "Look, this is not on Adobe. The company are not paying. If you want to come, this is on your own dime." But we ended up with about 10 of us on the mountain that weekend. And I thought, look, that was a true testament to the team culture that we'd built, that people wanted to spend, the best part of €1,000 to be together for a weekend in a Swiss mountain, doing some skiing. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and you said there that, you are spending a lot of time with your colleagues. You have to get on, right? And the litmus test of having the right culture is that willingness to be with each other, even outside of work. And I think that's a great example of being together on the ski slopes and operating like a professional sports team to deliver on the outcome, but being happy and content with each other and working together at the same time. Now, I know you joined Curvo 10 months ago as an investor and advisor. What was it that you saw in Curvo that led you wanting to join and be part of the mission in terms of what we're building in real-time sales intelligence?
Yeah, there was a number of reasons. As I'd mentioned earlier, I'm quite an analytical individual. We talk a lot about science and art at Kong. That helps with our Italian founders that love cooking. They love the balance of the art and the food with the science of business. For me, I'm probably 80% science, 20% art, maybe 70-30, but I'm going to go with Pareto's law, the classic 80-20. And I thought the science and cadence and rigor that Curvo brought was phenomenal. I remember when you did a demo to me, we run through a conversation. It was a sample discovery meeting. You were trying to sell to me at the time as an investor, but as a prospective customer. And then after we finished the discovery call, we went back in and I interrogated the data like I would as a manager. And I'd asked some questions around who was the champion, what was the pain, what was the follow-up, so on and so forth. And the data and the metrics that immediately came back, I was kind of mind blown really at how good that was. The second part that really, really impressed me was, like I've said, I've built inside sales teams. I now run the commercial business at Kong. We are a high velocity business. We do an awful lot of discovery meetings. We're doing at least 30 discovery meetings per quarter. So the real-time prompts that Curvo was delivering, I thought was phenomenal. So if you're speaking to a financial services customer and they say, my challenge is X, Curvo's ability to go and grab a case study from another financial services customer that had that same challenge, provide the rep the prompt so they could talk with confidence and almost immediately become a bit of a thought leader with that customer, I thought was just phenomenal, right? Because no sales rep on the planet has got the ability to memorize 800 case studies and 800 solutions to a certain pain point. Or certainly I don't, I'm not that clever. But very, very few people, I think, can do that. So Curvo's ability to do that hard work for you and make you seem as if you know every inch of the company and the products you're selling, I thought was just, very, very, very impressive.
That's all very, very nice to hear. And I think certainly on the point around making every rep sound like a consultative expert in their calls, because inherently you're talking to multiple different buyer personas. It could be 5, 10, 20, particularly in Adobe's example, where you've got a plethora of different industries that you're going after. And you won't always know the right talk track, rhythm, and types of case studies that would resonate with that end buyer. And this ultimately is how we're empowering reps to be able to deliver the language of the buyer that makes them sound like an expert, but ultimately delivers a better buying experience, where the buyer is able to feel content that they understand them, their problems, their goals, and leading back to the urgency point, ultimately drives better business cases, better outcomes, and moves stuff through the pipeline much faster. And Medic, of course, being a key driving force for us, quantifying Medic, showing you how you've established pains and making that the mantra in the companies that we're working with.
Yeah, I think just going back to the Medic piece, we are a Medic or a MedPick company. I'm a huge fan of the force management guys. In fact, a lot of our sales enablement team, we've got a phenomenal sales enablement team at Kong, and they're all derived from force management training, ex-sprinkler. That science piece, like I've said, sort of 80% science, 20% art. The ability within Curvo, again, to define, going back to common language, what we're referring to as a Medic scorecard, the ability to customize that, and then to put that into the hands of your sellers, I thought was incredibly important. I think when you and I first spoke, I had said for people that were in the business development function, the inside sales function, the mid-market commercial functions, this was going to be just so incredibly impactful because of the volume that they were going through. And again, I think that rings really true today. I know you guys are onboarding lots of customers, and I think this is a game changer, in all honesty.
Yeah, so exciting road ahead. Certainly with giving that depth to sales teams globally and helping them to enable their teams to be as high performance as possible. So as a closing remark, knowing what you know now as a seasoned sales leader and all the wisdom you had, if you had to rewind to the start of your sales career and share a word of wisdom to your younger self, what would that be?
It's a tough one. I think there's 3 things for me that if I could give some advice to my 21-year-old self going into sales, it would probably be 3 things. So, number 1, find very early in your career a truly great leader that you can learn from and help you develop. I've been lucky. I've worked for some incredible managers, but I think if you can get that great leader from day one, I think that really, really helps you. I think number 2 for me would be put yourself in a challenging but hyper growth environment. So people talk a lot about playbook companies. They're inherently tough. But actually, if the company is in hyper growth mode and you've got to work every hour God sends and it's super tough, do you know what? Great, because that's going to set you up really, really well. And then I think the 3rd piece of advice would be get into SaaS as quick as possible, because like I've said, as great as those 2 years were in managed services, SaaS is a different ball game, and I think that's where you can be very successful and earn the money that you want to earn.
Yeah, SaaS has the best leverage, and it's the place to be for sellers to be in that hyper growth mode. And back to the timing point that you mentioned earlier. But look, Dale, it's been a pleasure having you on the Funnel Vision podcast today. I think we've got a really informative discussion for the viewers, and thanks for coming by and sharing your story.
Pleasure. I hope my thoughts and opinions are useful. I'm not sure if they are, but thank you for having me on. Appreciate it, and look forward to watching the other episodes in the series.